Janeway and Neelix have been to the local space Tesco in a shuttle to grab some essentials. After a Neelix comedy scene, patent pending, where we show he cleared up a misunderstanding between Janeway and the traders, we depart to rendezvous with Voyager. Slight problem, it's not there. They detect it a little over a light year away, which will take them more than a week if the entry on shuttlecraft speeds in the Star Trek Voyager technical manual is accurate, but Janeway and Neelix don't worry about that, so neither should we. They arrive to find Voyager adrift. There are no signs of issues, but there is some sort of electric wibbly that prevents them from scanning for life signs. We land and discover the main computers offline, as are communications systems. Janeway decides to head to the bridge to figure things out. On the way, they detect a signal inside the quarters of Ensign Mum, but it's just a broadcast of Neelix's silly little videos, which he's still making for some reason. But then I'm in no position to cast stones on that one, am I? It was started 11 hours previously, and the unfinished food on the table was replicated around then too. No time to theorize on the cause, as they hear a buzzing outside and go to investigate. We track it down to one of the teleporter rooms, where we find this, and I've seen enough sci-fi to know that the correct course of action in this situation is to take off and nuke the site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. As if that wasn't enough, power has started to fail all over the ship, not least of which in environmental controls, causing things to get a bit warm because of the warp core. Off to a turbo lift so we can get to the bridge and figure out what's going on. Looks like the source of that buzzing has other ideas, as it gets into the shaft and stops the lift before banging about a bit. It's also brought some of its mates, one of whom sticks a fleshy spout through the door and pisses some green on Neelix. Janeway poops yellow back and its scarpers, but she thinks hanging around here is unwise, and instead suggests they leg it through the roof after making sure there are none above them. We're crawling through Jeffrey's tubes to get to the bridge. While we're at it, Janeway gives the green piss on Neelix a quick scan and determines it's the same stuff that melted through the teleporter pad. This raises some questions for me, but maybe the reason he wears that hideous suit is because it's made of a material resistant to all known biological hazards, something he'd find useful while cooking. That said, he does seem to be wheezing a bit, so maybe the green piss is even worse than Leola root. Regardless, Janeway manages to detect human life signs, albeit rather faint, so off we go again. Some more Jeffrey's tubes later, Neelix is starting to struggle. Janeway scans him and tells him he has a fever and fluid in his lungs, and we give a point to the writers here for Neelix correcting her to lung in the singular. He had his nicked in Season 1, remember, and Kez donated one of hers. Either way, he's a bit fucked up, so Janeway pops off to grab a first aid kit and fill him up with drugs. While she's gone, our buzzy little friend returns, and a screaming Neelix seems to forget he has a gun, instead calling for Mummy Janeway. She returns to find Neelix gone, and the area covered with more biological fluids than insert your own punchline here. Janeway's in engineering. Why? To get a gun from the special gun box, obviously. Why is there a gun lying in a box next to the fucking warp core? Who knows, but there is, and we're getting it. And while we're here, let's have a little gearing up scene and a shot to make us think of Ripley while we're at it. Suitably armed, Janeway enters the bridge. And at this point, I'm calling a stop to proceedings because this is utter bollocks. Now, I don't tend to care about ship layout stuff because life's too short, but this one's particularly egregious, so buckle up kids, cause we're going to work through the logic. Okay, so we land on Voyager and decide to go to the bridge, right? Sensible, logical. I mean, not really, because engineering is significantly closer and that'd be the place to figure out technical faults, but fuck it. We're going to the bridge because the bridge is where all the cool people work. And Tom Paris. We arrive in the shuttle bay on deck 10 and go to the turbo lift, the one which runs right by the entrance to engineering, one floor below, but let's ignore that. The lift gets stopped by the buzz monster somewhere between deck 10 and deck 1 where the bridge is, so we climb up one or more decks manually. Neelix gets taken by the buzz monster on deck 4, which we know because Janeway said only 3 more ladders to the bridge, and at this point she decides we need a bigger gun. Okay, that seems reasonable. Elevated potential threat suggests an elevated potential response. Where do we go for a gun? Engineering in an unsecured box. Okay, I mean, there's no reason for there to be a gun in a box in engineering, and it's a massive safety hazard and a security issue, but let's go fetch the gun in engineering. We climb from deck 4 back down to deck 11 where main engineering is, to climb back up a ladder in engineering to deck 10 where upper engineering is, because that's where the special gun crate is kept for reasons we'll never understand. Incidentally, the upper deck of engineering has Jeffrey's tube access, so entering through the main door was entirely unnecessary. Back down to 11 for the main engineering exit, then all the way up to the bridge on deck 1. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, perhaps engineering is where they keep the guns. No, my friends, no it is not. They keep the guns in the armory area of the security complex, and I invite you all now to take a guess which deck the security complex is on. Those of you who guessed deck 4, please collect your winnings. That's right, kids, the guns are on the deck she was on when she decided she wanted a gun. Now, I realise this is probably because they didn't have a set for the armory when they filmed this, though sticking some guns in the cargo bay set that they do already have would have done it, but instead of engineering, how's this? Have Janeway keep a secret holdout stash in her quarters. The image of Janeway we're trying to present this episode is one of a badass. Having her go to her quarters, open up a hidden safe, and pull out a rifle and supplies certainly plays into that, and her quarters are on deck 3, so it's on the way to the bridge. It certainly makes far more sense than the idea that we have a designated unsecured engineering gun, you know, for when we really need to do some shooting in the room filled with things that will explode the entire ship. But, again, I digress. Janeway's on the bridge and poking with some tech behind a panel before sending a distress signal to anybody in range, so I guess the poking got communications and all the main computer working again. All of which is being watched by Buzzmonster, who swoops in and hits her arm. Except it's not Buzzmonster. At least, if it is, it's a significantly smaller one. Janeway runs over the impact mark with a shiny thing, presumably to sanitize it, before the computer reminds us about those life signs. They're in the mess hall from the looks of it, and in pretty bad shape. Kim's got goop on him, and Chakotay has some mini buzz monsters nesting in his neck. Their dad shows up to see what all the fuss is about, and knocks Janeway over a table. Janeway poops some yellow in response, and Buzz Monster detonates, so it looks like we're not dicking about with stun settings. Janeway's had enough of that and scarpers while clutching her side. Off to sickbay then, which is 3 decks down by the way, but I'm going to stop checking that shit as it's doing my head in, where the doctor greets her at gunpoint. He starts to treat her injuries, but also tells us they don't have much time, as the Buzz Monsters will have detected she's there and be on their way. While he works, he tells us that we've been invaded by a macrovirus, which is an oxymoron, but I've already digressed enough in this one, so we'll let that go. He says we picked it up after responding to a distress call at a local mining colony after they reported a viral outbreak. The doc got his first away mission, found a virus which had mutated to the size of a mosquito and developed the ability to fly, because of reasons, and accidentally brought some on board when he teleported back. Oh, and the virus is also capable of moving through electrical systems, because reasons, as it went from the teleporter buffer to a gel pack inside a food replicator in the mess hall. Why a gel pack in the mess hall instead of one closer, like in the teleporter room? Because reasons. B'Elanna found the manky gel pack after a complaint and decided to just grab hold of it right after saying it looked proper dodgy. The pack pissed some yellow on her, and the infection of the crew started from there. Containment attempts failed when the virus grew big enough to poke its spiky nub in through the decks, and everybody got infected. Oh, and in case you were wondering, all the other gel packs on the ship are fine, and you shouldn't waste any time wondering why that would be the case. Okay? Okay. The end of the story coincides with the end of the treatment. Well, almost. She's infected with the virus, you see, so the doctor gives her a shot of the solution. At least, it's probably the solution. He hasn't tested it on a human yet. Luckily, it works and she doesn't die, so that's good. What's less good is that the Buzz Monsters have arrived and are banging on the door. They're attracted to infrared radiation, you see, and warm bodies give that off. So do holograms, he says, as he's been attacked by them himself, which raises the question of why they didn't break into sickbay for him, but let's ignore that for now. After giving her a gizmo to mask her heat so the Buzz Monsters can't track her as easily, we grab a couple of jars of the virus solution and pop down to environmental controls so we can spray it through the ventilation on the ship. The doc goes too, though via a different route, so we have a better chance of someone making it there. Janeway gets to do some more pooping on the way, but the doc is less lucky. He was swarmed and had to take refuge in a shuttle, so he won't be joining her. Neither he nor Janeway suggest using the emergency teleporter on the shuttle, but let's be generous and say it wouldn't have worked anyway because of the electrical wibbly that prevented scanning at the start of the show. Regardless, Janeway's on her own. She manages to both get to the environmental controls and to fix them, and is about to spray the ship when some kabooms happen. We're being pooped at by those traders from the start of the episode. Another misunderstanding? Not quite. They received the distress call from the miners too and decided to kill them a bit. I guess this is a species that understands why you should nuke the site from orbit. As we sent out a distress signal too, he's giving us the same treatment. Janeway calls him and asks if he wouldn't mind not blowing up Voyager, as she has a cure for the virus. He gives her an hour to make it work, or he'll resume killing them all, which seems fair. Bit of a problem though, the pooping we just took buggered the environmental controls again, so now we can't spray the ship. There are only a few systems still running, but one of them's the holodeck, so it's time for a diversion. While the buzz monsters are attacking the inhabitants of Neelix's resort program, Janeway tells the Doctor he has a chance to go and cure the crew. She's going to say hi to the buzz monsters herself as she straps some explosives onto the cure. She makes it to the holodeck and is about to throw the heal bomb when she gets knocked down by a buzz monster that's late to the party. A bit of rough and tumble ensues before Janeway stabs the shit out of it. That heal bomb's about to go off, so she tosses it into the holodeck, then scarpers before it kabooms. Given the size of the resulting explosion, I'm not convinced the cure part of it was entirely necessary. The Doc calls to let us know that he's cured the crew and that all the buzz monsters are dead, so I guess that one that attacked Janeway was the only one not on the holodeck. Oh, and Janeway calls the trader to let him know that we cured the virus, so we're not going to get blown up either. Later, Janeway's painting in her ready room with a little music in the background to remind you that she's not just a badass. Chakotay comes to let her know that everybody's mostly okay, and to invite her to go skiing on the holodeck that didn't get blown up, but she declines, and we fly away accompanied by the sounds of smooth jazz. I think it's fair to say many of us will have noticed some obvious comparisons for this episode. The darker, dirtier, often cramped environments, the organic nature of the threat, Janeway in vest and gun mode. I wonder if the mining colony where we found the infection was called Hadley's Hope. All of which isn't necessarily a bad thing, of course. If you're going to borrow, then borrowing from something that won 2 Oscars and was nominated for 4 more is a pretty good plan. Captains should get the chance to badass it up with the best of them, and this is a fun little example of Kate Mulgrew getting to do just that. A shame then that the rest of the plot seems so cobbled together. There's an above-average quantity of holes in this one, and I'm left feeling that they started with the core concept of Janeway but Ripley, and considered everything else secondary. That's disappointing, as I do believe there's a place for the odd bug hunt episode in Trek, and had this one been treated with a touch more care, it could have been a memorable little action romp. As it stands, the weaker plot elements bring it down, and we're left with something that's merely okay. There is one other thing worth mentioning. The opening scene of this episode is a Neelix being Neelix thing, and while I normally recoil from those, this one does have a point. Neelix's original reason for being on the ship, namely as a guide for the area that Voyager landed in, has become obsolete as we've left the space he knows. Having him pivot to act as a mixture of diplomat and gopher gives him a purpose beyond chef. They could have just left him that way and never addressed it, so I think it's worth acknowledging the effort. End of episode.